Hi everyone, it's Rob Watson, the module leader for TECH1002, Social Media and Technology, and this is the overview for and summary of the 11th lecture in the series, and it's the lecture before the Christmas break. So what I thought I'd do this time was have it's a fairly light-hearted look at the idea of the hipster and the role and the position that the hipster has occupied in our popular culture for the last 10 years. I think the hipster is now something which is in the past, and people have moved on from it. So you might have older brothers and sisters or cousins or other friends. You might even be a hipster, I don't know. So this will be something that takes it and looks at it in different ways. Doesn't necessarily, it's a bit tongue-in-cheek in places, this one, so I'm not necessarily saying that this is the most intellectually sophisticated look at the idea of the hipster, but saying that, there are some interesting ideas that it generates, and I'll talk about them in a second. As ever, I've got the PowerPoint slides ready. There's lots of clips that I'll be showing, and we'll do this through lots of images, which I don't share, but I do share the background lecture notes, which has the reading and the links to the material that we're going to look at, and other supplementary material as well. So it gives you a bit of a background information about what the topic's going to cover. If you want to do some reading for this lecture, then you could look at the Jones and Hafner chapter 10, which is about social networking. And while it's not directly relevant to what we're going to talk about, it has some correspondence in terms of the way that I think hipsters are they're very much a noughties and teenies, if that's the phrase, social phenomenon, and that's aligned with the rise of network culture and online culture and social media. So we can't divorce the two. It's like closing off the circle of some of the issues that we've looked at previously. There's a television program that you can look at, which is it's about, again, it's not directly related to hipsters, but it's a really interesting program about the boy band from the 1970s, the Bay City Rollers. And in watching this, it'll throw into contrast the kind of artificial nature of pop fandom and the artificial nature of the pop group, the marketed group. And it might help us to look at our experience that we're living through now and have lived through quite recently, and ask the question, how artificial and how constructed is our present experience, and how in future years, in 30 years' time, we might be looking back at documentaries that talk about, the things that we're interested in now, or you're interested in now, and the way that they were heavily, significant and tied and contextual and contingent of the times that we live through at the moment. But that's taking it quite much further ahead than we need to at this point. So what I'll cover in this lecture is the way that hipsters are thought about, where they are represented in the media, and there's a lot of scorn out there for the idea of the hipster. You don't get a free ride if you're a hipster, despite the glossiness and the length of your beard. Then we'll look at the idea of what it means to be, because I think one of the things that the hipsters tied into is the idea of the social media producer, of people, they're sitting in trendy cafes with your Apple MacBook doing some work and listening to music on your headphones and then riding off on your fixie bike. Those cliches, if you like, they tell us something. They tell us something about an underlying shift in society, which is away from an instructed, a factory model of knowledge production and social media production, to something which is more generative, so something which is more creative, so something which is less defined by anybody in a hierarchy, but it's something which exists out there in the networks that people maintain through their sense of fashion, their music, their films, the clothes that they wear, all the signs and signifiers. I suppose what's different about the hipster movement is the fact that it includes a really essential element of creativity and production as part of the mainstream signifier. That said, a lot of what we're going to look at doesn't really take it too seriously, and there's a real kind of stream of kind of parody of what the hipster's about and how it's represented. There's a really interesting concept called ID attainment, which is the kind of sense that you use your identity as a form of entertainment. So we'll look at that in kind of briefly, as it's a different way of thinking about how we present ourselves. It's almost a very much more playful mode. It's like our identity is a kind of game, that we don't have a fixed position with who we say we are and what we do, because we know that we can kind of shape and sculpt it differently by adopting different kind of costumes. And that'll bring us on to looking at the idea of the Erving Goffman work, who was a sociologist in the 1950s, who talked about the kind of the dramaturgical, I think that's how it's pronounced, in terms of how we adopt a persona, a social persona. So we might be able to use that as an idea which kind of explains some way how we interact online and how we interact in terms of our communities of fashion or subcultural identity that we talked about last week. So the notes are up online. It's a fairly kind of light-hearted look at contemporary popular culture. And it gives us a nice opportunity to relax a little bit before our Christmas break. And so I'll see you on the Thursday morning, and bring your notebooks and pens as ever, and I'll see you then.